believe it or not, this is actually not an apple. You might be thinking maybe it's a crabapple. It's not that either. So what is this thing, and why are these some of my all-time favorite fruits to grow? Stick around, because this is one of the best kept secrets to grow in a cold climate. I'm Luke with Regenerative Fruit Growers, and today I'm talking about this fruit right here. So if you haven't figured out what this is yet, it's an apple crab, or a cross between an apple and a crabapple. That is, one of the parents of this apple crab was an apple, and when it was in bloom, a pollinator came by, whether it was a moth or a bee or something else, and visited a crabapple afterwards that was also in bloom at the same time. When the pollinator visited one of the crabapple's flowers, the pollen residue from the apple came into contact with the pistil, or the female part of the crabapple, and given that apples and crabapples are genetically compatible to cross with one another, fertilization then took place. These are some of my favorite things to grow, and if I were to rank my favorite varieties of fruit in general, including even things like peaches and apricots, pears, etc., then several of the apple crabs would actually make that list, and that's how good they are. To me, the flavor of these outmatches many of the apples that are out there, because you happen to get some of the most unique flavor combinations. You happen to get qualities from the apple parent, such as its mellowness and sweetness, combined with qualities from the crabapple parent, which are often too strong for people on its own, including the crabapple's wild, spicy, and strong acid flavor. But what you can get with the apple crab can often be the best of both worlds. Now, on top of getting the best of both worlds in terms of flavor, you also get the best of both worlds in terms of size. Look at this thing. I mean, they're larger than a crabapple, but they're also smaller than an apple, coming in typically around 2 inches in diameter. One of my mentors, the late, great Rod McEver, who after biting into a Martha apple crab was so impressed that he learned how to graft and went on to actually have the largest germplasm of fruit-bearing tree varieties in all of Montana.
Yeah, the apple crabs are my favorite fruit. They're tough, they're flavorful, they're a good snack. You can eat a lot of them a day. You don't get bogged down like one big old grocery store grapefruit size sugar bomb, you know.
Now, another selling point of apple crabs is that they're super adapted to the cold. Given that crab apples, again, one of its parents, tend to be extremely hardy, in most cases down to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or more. So I'm talking Dolgo crab, Siberian crab, and others. These are super low temps that often their apple cousins can't boast about surviving down to. And this imparts a lot of hardiness into the apple crab, making it a must grow for those, not just in cold climates, but especially cold areas such as Alaska and others, where you also have a super short growing season. Even some of the cold hardy apples like Honeycrisp, which have a fairly good degree of midwinter hardiness and can survive and ripen in parts of Montana, won't even ripen in some of the other cold areas with shorter growing seasons like Alaska. That's where the apple crab comes in. The best apple crabs to grow in a cold climate would include varieties like Rescue, which would be early here in Montana and mid-season ripening in Alaska. Trailman, early here in Montana, but mid-season in Alaska. Centennial, mid-season in Montana, but late in Alaska. Chestnut, which ripens mid-season here in Montana, but it ripens late in Alaska. Martha, a mid-season ripening apple crab in Montana and late in Alaska. And if you're really lucky, one of my all-time favorites, which is, spoiler, this apple crab right here, Kerr, comes on late in Montana and would be considered very late ripening in Alaska. All of these varieties, without any exception, as we've measured here in some of the coldest parts of Montana, like Gallatin Gateway, can withstand minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit and even below minus 50. And if you're interested in these and you're in a cold climate, also look into the apple crabs that clever breeders have actually gone a step further and crossed with apples. These would mainly be apple genetics, but you still get 25% crabapple. So this would be, technically speaking, an apple crab, but people just call them apples. These apple crabs, or whatever you want to call them, often have some nice apple crab flavors, but these are often even larger than the apple crabs themselves, especially when they cross those with fairly good-sized, larger domesticated apples. And you can even go a step further and make those apple crabs really hardy, like they've done in the Nor series of apples, where they've bred things like Norland, Nor Kent, and others that are hardy to -50 or lower. And they can also ripen in time during a short growing season. All right, well, might as well bite into this thing. I've only been holding it the whole episode. This is the Kerr, as I mentioned earlier. Let's give it a shot. I already know what it's gonna taste like. One of my all-time favorites. Definitely has almost a tropical flavor to it. I would say it's sub-acid. You definitely get some of the sweetness from its Haralson parent. So Haralson, which comes out of Minnesota, is one of its parents, and then you've got Dolgo crab as the other. So Dolgo gives it some of that acidity, Haralson gives it some of that sweetness. Where those tropical flavors come from, I have no idea. I would venture to guess maybe Dolgo, but this is a great apple. If you liked this video and you want to learn more, not just about apple crabs, but about all things fruit tree related, especially growing them in a cold climate, then subscribe to the channel and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot for watching and happy growing.